It's been nearly 3 years since the massive Ponzi scheme run by Bernie Madoff imploded. Now, for the first time, his family is speaking out in the new book, Truth and Consequences, Life Inside the Madoff Family. We're joined exclusively, again live, by Ruth and Andrew Madoff and Andrew's fiancée, Catherine. Good morning again.
Good morning.
The question that's been asked more than any other question in 3 years, did Ruth know? And of course, the second one would be, did Andrew know? You were his constant companion, Bernie, married for more than 50 years. You lived the lifestyle he lived. For a short time, you had an office at his business, a very short time. Did you see nothing, Ruth?
Nothing.
Nothing?
Absolutely nothing. When he called to say he was coming home with the boys, he had something to tell us. I thought, well, the market was crashing. I mean, the world seemed to be coming to an end. So I was worried because I didn't know what to expect. But what he ended up saying was something that in a million years I never would have
You
expected.
had no knowledge of his business, never really cared to ask questions?
Well, I sort of knew he invested money for people. It was clear a lot of our friends, people we knew and loved, had money, and it seemed as if everybody had money there. But he had a huge trading business. He had been in the industry for a long time. He had done huge advances in automated trading and over-the-counter order flow that traded New York Stock Exchange companies, and he was known for all those things. It never occurred to me.
Andrew, you're a smart guy. You and your brother, Mark, was a smart guy too, and you worked in the same business, although different sides of the business. And you know what it takes, the financial industry, what it's made up of. And when you would go to your dad and say, Dad, tell me about your side of the business, he would say, basically, it's none of your business. And he would keep that floor of the building very much off limits. Didn't that throw up a red flag? If you didn't know something, didn't you suspect something?
I didn't. I had grown up my entire life attending functions where he was being honored and hearing about the legend of Bernie Madoff from the time where I was a young boy. People I would meet in the street, or once I graduated college and started working for the business, and at industry functions would say, "Oh, you're Bernie Madoff's son. Man's incredible, and you know, if there's some way that I could get in, please put in a good word for me." And people had this incredible vision of him as a spectacularly skillful trader, and it just never occurred to me that it was all fake.
When he broke the news at this family meeting in the apartment over on the east side, you and your brother immediately turned him in, and that's basically the last time you spoke to him. You cut off all contact with your dad. I think a lot of people can understand that. But you also cut off contact with your mother. And as an outsider looking in, Ruth, do you know what I thought? I thought it made you look guilty. I thought
so too.
Did you not think about that?
We never for a moment suspected that she was aware of any of this before we were.
Yeah, but as an outsider, if you won't talk to your mom, I think he must think she knew something, or he knows she knew something.
Yeah, we hadn't planned to not speak to her. In fact, the two of us had discussed taking her into our homes. We assumed that she was going to call us and say, "Look, I'm leaving, and you know, can you take me in?" And we had that discussion and figured out the logistics of how that was going to work. And it wasn't until I believe it was a day or two later where we got the phone call asking us to sign on to his bail bond that we recognized that was not going to be the case.
House arrest. For 3 months, Bernie was in house arrest in the penthouse on the east side. You were there with him, and boy, the media focus on that building. And an effort of full disclosure, I know, because I live in that building. And like so many other people, Ruth, I was wondering, what are they doing up there? What's going on in that penthouse? What was the relationship like with Bernie during those 3 months?
We had just a kind of everyday happenings. The lawyers would come, I had paperwork to do, watch television, ate meals. Nothing was going on.
You were speaking to him? Weren't you screaming at him? I mean, were there fights?
You know, it took some time for me to realize that the person whom I lived with for 50 years and loved for all that time, practically my entire life, was the same person that destroyed all those people. Relatives, friends, everybody. There was a part of him that was warm and loving. He was a wonderful father. I had very close family life, the four of us. I couldn't figure it out.
What you couldn't have known during those 3 months that this scandal would take another very personal toll. That your son Mark would commit suicide on the second anniversary of your husband's arrest. How do you handle a call like that when you got that news?
You know, the last time I ever saw Mark was when he left that room when Bernie told us. I never saw him after that confession. And I'll never get over that no matter what happens. And I blame Bernie, and it's the worst thing that can happen. Just the worst.
You blame Bernie as well? You blame your dad, Andrew?
Absolutely.
Catherine?
No question about it.
Do you think in some ways that Mark killed himself not only because he couldn't handle the burden of the headlines, but in some ways to punish your dad? To give your father something to think about every day for the rest of his life?
I think there was an element of that to it. After his first suicide attempt, when I visited him in the hospital, he and I talked about that. I mean, how had it come to this, and trying to get at what he was feeling and exactly where he was. And he talked about that specifically, and I tried to explain to him that was not going to be effective, and there was just to take his own life to try and send a message was horrible and something he couldn't do. He has 4 beautiful children, and to leave them without a dad is just unbearable.
Ruth, you, it seems to me, have lost an awful lot. You lost your husband, you lost your son, you lost your wealth, you lost your good name. And now in an effort to reconcile with Andrew and the grandchildren, you have cut off all contact with Bernie. Do you miss him? Do you ever lie in bed at night and wish you could speak to him?
I'd like to speak to him and tell him a few things, but it's not because I miss him anymore. You know, the villain of all this tragedy is behind bars. The rest of us are just trying to get back to our lives and make peace with whatever we have left, and the victims sort of figure out their lives, and the family figuring out our lives, and that's what we do.
I asked the question because this was a man you were willing to die with. After 50 years of marriage, you were willing to take your life at the same time he took his life. How do you go from that to not speaking to him at all?
Well, it was a long time in between, and that very first moment I felt so helpless. And then I started to get a little bit stronger, and I did have an extensive email relationship with Mark and Stephanie. Our attorneys didn't want us to speak. And I think if we had been able to talk to each other, it would have been helpful to Mark and to all of us. But that was verboten, so we never did.
Andrew, as was mentioned in our piece by Diana Henriquez, no criminal charges have ever been filed against you or your mom or your brother. Do you still live in fear that you'll get that phone call? And would you like the prosecutors to stand up in front of microphones one day and say they did nothing wrong, they were not involved?
Well, one of the reasons I've wanted to speak publicly from the beginning is because I have nothing to hide, and I just want to have a chance for people to see me, see who I am. We've been cooperating with the authorities from the beginning, and I'm hopeful that I will be able to put this all behind me sometime soon.
I mentioned that your dad, your husband, called me several times last night, and one of the things he said to me that still haunts him is that he never had the chance to explain to you and your brother what really happened and how he got into that position. He's written you letters, I know, and he said all he wants is the chance to explain it. Aren't you curious what he has to say?
Not at all. There's no way to explain what he did, the damage that he's caused to so many people, so many lives that he's destroyed. What possible explanation could there be? The few things that I've read about him from his interviews and the audio interview that he gave, I'm not hearing sincerity and remorse in there. And, I try to find it in my heart to be able to forgive him, but I'm not there yet.
Andrew Madoff, Ruth Madoff, Catherine Hooper, thank you all for joining us this morning. I appreciate it. And the book is out today, I believe.